Today's reading is from Ruth chapter 4. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer, of whom Boaz had spoken, came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." They sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know. For there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." And he said, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz said, "The day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." Then the Redeemer said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm the transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went to her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse and the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David.
Morning, King's Church. Hope you're doing well. Thank you so much, Hannah, for reading Ruth chapter 4 as we enter into our last part of the Ruth preaching series today. And thank you so much, Catherine and Emeka, for talking. Catherine, sharing your story, how God was with you, strengthened you, equipped you in really challenging times. And it's thrilling seeing how God's brought you through and is bringing you through. So Ruth chapter 4 is this wonderful chapter. It's a story about redemption. We've seen the brokenness and hopelessness of Naomi's plight and Ruth's plight in chapter 1. And then you see this turning point in Ruth chapter 2, verse 5, where Boaz pays attention and sees Ruth and then starts playing this role of protecting and caring for her. You see love developing. You know what? The book of Ruth has the best elements, or the elements that are best in a story. The protagonists, They face challenges. Against all odds, they continue on and don't give up. There's costly sacrifice. There's a blossoming love between Ruth and Boaz, two unlikely candidates. And then there's redemption and there's resurrection, where Naomi and Ruth's plight gets turned around. The story is one of resurrection, acceptance from rejection, joy from mourning, life from death. And today I could spend the whole of this talk talking about Ruth's family tree and how that Obed was the grandfather of King David, who ended up being in the line of Jesus, our Messiah. I'm not going to do that today. I'm not going to focus on that. Instead, I'll write a blog on that this week and put it on the church website because I think there's lots of things it could teach us. Instead, today, I just want to focus on two things: the beauty of redemption and the cost of redemption. In Turkey, I remember a divorced lady coming to our church who was from a country that people in Turkey despised. I remember her telling a story when she came to our church of being an outsider, of being looked down on being disregarded. She worked long hours. She got little pay. She worked for employers who would, at the drop of a hat, stop employing her. It was really difficult. I remember her explaining to one of our team when she went to the hospital with them one day that it was the first time she'd been in a hospital where the staff had treated her kindly, and it's because she was associated with someone who had more respect in the community. And then this beautiful thing happened as she entered the church and experienced the gospel, which was she encountered redemption. She encountered a community that cared for her. She encountered the grace of God and realized that God loved her. She knew care, she knew acceptance, and she knew honoring. And in the story of Naomi in the book of Ruth, there's that, and there's so much more of a redemption story. And it was a beautiful thing in Turkey where you saw that not only did God play the role of Redeemer, but actually also the church played a role in honoring and accepting and playing their part in this redemption story. Naomi's name means plenty, and that name must have mocked her when she returned back to Bethlehem, empty. She's in mourning, whilst in Moab, her husband dies, and then her two sons die. She's in poverty. The driving force for her returning to Bethlehem is she's heard that there's food in the land. You can tell how desperate her situation is because as soon as they return, Ruth goes and starts gleaning in the field behind the reapers so as to have a bit of grain that they can live off. Also, her prospects are very bleak. She's a widow. She has no children. She's got no prospect of future prosperity. You feel the brokenness of Naomi when she speaks to the women of Bethlehem who meet her when she arrives back. This is what she says. She says to them, "Don't call me Naomi," which means plenty. "Call me Mara," which means bitter. "For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" Naomi's in poverty. She's in mourning. But she is also shunned and shamed by the women of Bethlehem. Yael Ziegler, in his commentary, puts it like this: no one responds to Naomi's bitter, heartbreaking speech. The townspeople seem to gaze silently after her as she trudges off in the aftermath of her painful monologue. In fact, the people of Bethlehem abandon Naomi to her fate. No more words are exchanged between Naomi and her former neighbors until Boaz publicly marries Ruth, facilitating Naomi's newfound acceptance. So there's no response to her speech. There's no offer of help. Naomi and Ruth are met with silence, and they're left vulnerable, without protection, having to fend for themselves. So Naomi's vulnerable. She's poor. She's mourning. She's shunned. Yet by Boaz marrying Ruth and being her redeemer, Naomi's fortunes are turned around. Remember the silence of the women in Bethlehem that we just read about after Naomi's speech? And then in Ruth chapter 4, the women of Bethlehem declare to Ruth this: "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. So Naomi is accepted by the community. They celebrate with her and they declare how worthy Ruth is of honor and praise. They declare having Ruth as a daughter-in-law is better than having 7 sons. 7 in Scripture is a symbol of completeness and wholeness. To have 7 sons is the height of blessing. Ruth is honored. She's a living portrait of the woman in Proverbs 31. I don't think there's any other woman in Scripture really who's praised as highly as her. Naomi's shame is turned to honor, her shunning to acceptance. Naomi's family life continues. You see a picture of her sitting there nursing her grandson, who she never expected. And then, as you know the story, this grandson then becomes the great-grandfather or the grandfather of King David. She also, in Ruth marrying Boaz, has security for the future. It's a remarkable story, such a story of redemption, poverty to riches, mourning to laughter, shame to honor, vulnerability to protection. I just want us to take a moment to pause and reflect now. So we're going to have a couple of minutes. And I want you to think about this. It should come up in the chat. Where have you seen the beauty of redemption in your life and the life of others? So have a think about that, and then just thank God for it. So there's the beauty of redemption, but redemption comes at a cost. In Naomi's story, her redemption comes at great cost through the sacrificial love of both Ruth and Boaz. They both play the role of redeemer, Goel in Hebrew. Paul Miller, in his book, A Loving Life, expresses it like this: Boaz is the formal Goel, but Ruth is the Christ figure, the one who dies, that others may live. At that time, being a widow without any children would be incredibly vulnerable. And in order to protect those widows, the law, the scriptures, had in place certain provision for them so that they could be protected. This included an expectation for a brother-in-law to take a widow with no children under his care to continue the family line of the brother who died. A near kin could buy back land that had been sold due to hardship. If someone such as a widow like Ruth, Naomi was in poverty and had land to sell, it would be expected that a close relative would be the first person to be able to purchase that land. And that land wouldn't be sold permanently, it would be to be kept in the family and she could buy back at another time. And actually, after a period of time, it would be given back to her. And this is a situation we find in Ruth chapter 4. We realize Boaz's sacrifice when we see the unwillingness of a closer kin to redeem Naomi and Ruth and rescue them. It's only in chapter 4 it becomes apparent that Ruth has a piece of land, Naomi has a piece of land that she can sell, and so naturally she goes to the nearest kin to see if he will buy that land off her. This relative agrees to buy the land off her. He's thinking, you know what, for a few years I'll have to look after Naomi, then she's going to die, and that land will end up becoming part of my family because there's no other descendants it would go to. He's thinking, you know what, from a business point of view, that makes sense. And it's at this point that Boaz points out that if he takes the land, he also is required to care for Ruth, to have children with her so that the family line can continue. This means that that relative would have to pay for the land. He'd have to, over that time, provide for Naomi and for Ruth. Any children he has with Ruth will end up not taking his name, but taking the name of Elimelech's son. And then the land would be passed on to the sons at the end. It would be costly for him to play the role of redeemer. And redemption is costly, and he knew it. And with this new information, his response was, I cannot redeem it myself, lest I impair my inheritance. What's so striking is that we never know this closest relative's name. He's known in Hebrew as Poloni Almoni, which basically means Mr. So-and-so. And his name vanishes. It's actually written out of the story. And what's so fascinating is you've got a man who's concerned about protecting his inheritance. But in the end, no one knows his name. While Boaz, who plays remarkable sacrifice, is known throughout history. For Boaz, that was the same cost he had to pay for redeeming. As he was a distant relative, he wasn't required to do that, yet in love, he went above and beyond what was expected or what was demanded of in the law. Ziegler expresses it like this: Boaz is willing to pay a steep price, potentially sacrificing his reputation and perhaps his economic situation. The theologian Peter Lau writes, in the process of restoring or maintaining the lineage and the name of Elimelech, he is simultaneously risking his own lineage and name. Paradoxically, through his selfless actions, his name is honored and immortalized. Boaz was willing to lose face by being associated with Ruth, by marrying her, a Moabite woman. Conversely, Ruth gained honor by being associated with him and his good reputation. In the end, there is an honoring in the community of Boaz and Ruth. And Naomi is clearly blessed by the community, but that was not a given when Boaz stepped in love to play the role of redeemer. That wasn't guaranteed. He had everything to lose in terms of reputation, the likelihood of having children in his own name, and his economic situation. What's so striking is you look to the end of Ruth, actually it says that Obed was fathered by Boaz. Actually, he is identified as the father of him, and he's the one who everyone remembers. as the great-grandfather of King David, who then becomes the great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of King Jesus. But redemption is costly, yet sacrificial love is willing to pay the price and go beyond what would be expected. Paul Miller puts it like this: donors love from a distance. They give to help someone else at little risk for themselves. Every Christian's to be a donor. But in contrast, redeemers own the problem. The weight of life falls on them. They bind themselves to the person they love, and it's costly and it's risky. The word redeemer, goel, is used 50 times in the Old Testament. 18 times that describes how God is the redeemer who rescues his people. The other 32 times refer to how God's people are involved in redeeming one another. God's the ultimate redeemer, but in Scripture, God's people also get to play the role of redeemer. They get to be Boazes, people who stand and are involved in seeing people's lives restored. I want to just give you another moment to pause and reflect for a couple of minutes. And as you do that, I want you to think about this question. How can you move from being a donor towards being a redeemer? And is there anyone God is wanting you to walk with, carry the burdens of, and love above and beyond what would be expected? First role of redemption is a foreshadow. It's a picture that points towards Jesus' role as our Redeemer. It was Jesus who said in John chapter 12, verse 24, "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." You know what? Jesus didn't just say those words, he lived those words. He was the seed that went into the earth and died so that you and I could know life, so that he could be Redeemer for us. As I've often heard my friend Andy McCulloch say, Naomi and Ruth's story is our story also. We are starving and we're seeking bread. We are vulnerable and we're seeking protection. We are ashamed and we're seeking shame removal. And Jesus came as the perfect Redeemer. He gave his life to turn our plight and our situation around. He's the bread of life who came from the house of bread in Bethlehem, who satisfies our soul. He's the one who made a way that we could be adopted into the family of God, to be known as sons and daughters of the King of Kings. What greater protection and security is there? He's the one who on the cross took our shame upon himself, absorbed it. And then he lifts us up, puts us in a place of honor. So let's come to him now. Let's respond in worship to the Redeemer of us. If you haven't ever put your faith in Jesus, now is a time to cry out to him and say, would you reveal yourself? Maybe you want to pray with one of the prayer team. You can do that by clicking on the prayer button. But let's fix our eyes and praise our Redeemer.